A lot of times, if you're working out on a production floor or a construction site, or even out in the field, if you're going to customers' homes or whatever it is, you might not necessarily have a company email. And if you do, you're not sitting in front of a computer all day. So you may or may not
Right.
see it. So HR tends to be more in person connected, I feel like. We're not sending out, we do send out emails and we still have newsletters and we still have our HRIS systems and the mobile apps and everything. But embrace that and take advantage of that in person connection that we have with employees, because a lot of other industries and companies don't have that.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. Business and government concerns about global supply chain vulnerabilities, competition with China, and global political instability have led to renewed focus on rebuilding the North American manufacturing infrastructure. Traditionally called blue-collar jobs, modern manufacturing jobs are often high-tech and well-paying, but they also require specific skill sets and training that are not offered in many traditional education pathways. And I'm editorializing here, but our preoccupation with everyone going to college, even when they're better suited for success in a skilled trade, has limited the available pool of workers for an American industrial renaissance. Joining me today to discuss the state of the skilled trades in manufacturing is Marci Sogan. Marci is the Corporate Director of Human Resources for Anchor Partners, a family office with a specialization in manufacturing and metal fabrication companies. She has over 2 decades of HR leadership across industries, including retail, technology, private investment, and manufacturing. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Marci.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
In the intro, I mentioned the term blue collar, which calls to mind the idea of low wage, low skill, backbreaking jobs in really challenging environments. But when we're talking about the modern manufacturing jobs, how accurate is that characterization?
Yeah, that's not how I would characterize modern jobs. It comes across as almost lesser than white collar maybe, and I would not characterize it like that anymore. There's a variety of skills needed, a variety of talents needed. There's some pretty high technology happening with programs and machinery and a lot of robots that need to be operated and ran. So it's not that's really not a good characterization of it, I don't feel like anymore.
And I was just looking online at what some of these jobs can earn, and like a lot of the job postings for welders was $20 to $35 an hour. CNC operators was like 20 to 35. Robotics technicians, all these other jobs that didn't even exist years ago. Forklift operators making up to like $25 an hour to, operate a forklift.
Yeah.
And I know from our own clients that some of these automotive technicians out there can make over 6 figures. And so these aren't low wage jobs. And, I've raised 3 children and they've all found their path in the world. And, but if I had a kid who really wanted to work with his hands and wasn't suited for school, I sure wouldn't send him just to go get some, a college degree that didn't have a market concentration on, available for it, where I could, especially if he could go and he had the characteristics that would make him successful in that kind of role.
Yeah, especially if you're taking out student loans to get that degree.
Oh, yeah.
You're paying out money, paying out money, paying out money for years, while you could be learning a trade or a skill, and it takes a while, apprentice and journeyman, and it takes a while to get up to those steps. But it can be very lucrative, especially because they can start so much sooner. They don't have to wait 4 years to start that income earning potential.
Yeah, and you mentioned apprentices. So, like electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters, people like that, we didn't even talk about. I mean, that's a whole,
Right.
those more traditional skills, they're in demand too. Nobody's really, having a hard time getting people to come into those fields too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on the Workforce Solutions Board here in Tarrant County, and I'm pretty involved with Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce's workforce development efforts. The thing I keep hearing from employers is that the skilled trades workforce, that older generation, they're getting older, they're retiring, and there's not an up and coming new generation that's available just ready to take their place. Are you seeing that?
I am very much seeing that. Yeah. And I think particularly in our industries, that's going to be a challenge. And it's especially for the more experienced. So I think what a lot of companies are doing now, because we don't have a choice, labor is hard to find as it is. So we create when you can. I mean, some things you have to have licenses and, AC repair or whatever, you have to have a license. But when you can, you create internal training programs and you start with, you don't have to have any experience at all. Walk in the door, start, here, you want to learn how to weld, you want to work your way up, good attitude and good approach. And companies will train people, So you don't even have to go to sometimes a trade school or a different place to learn those things, because the companies will do it internally because sort of have to. That's the way they can
Right.
find labor.
Yeah, we've got clients in the trucking industry that are doing that for CDLs. They can't,
Yep.
they can't find people with, and so they're training them in house and getting them certified to drive, commercial motor vehicles.
Yeah, definitely. Something I think is kind of also a little bit of a unique challenge is, as like you had mentioned, that labor market is getting closer to retirement age. We start to lose some of our leaders, whether it's a foreman or supervisor or line lead or, whatever it is, we start to lose those leaders. Well, if there haven't been new ones coming in the door, how do we handle that? Do we promote from within? Just because somebody is a fantastic electrician, maybe they might not be your best project manager or supervisor or director. They might have zero desire to do that, quite frankly. They don't want to.
Right.
So finding the next, generation of leaders, I think, is a unique challenge. And there's, some back and forth, I feel like, on that, where some school of thought is, gosh, can you really have somebody manage this group of welders if they haven't been through it themselves and they don't know all the different, some of it's a little bit of an art, to be honest. There's a science to it, but some of it's an art that you have to learn as you go. So are they going to get the respect of the team if they haven't done that themselves? So there's a couple ways to look at it. Do you promote from within? Do you have your own leadership programs? So I've seen a lot of that. I've seen companies where if anybody's expressing interest in a leadership position internally, go ahead and start developing your own leaders and kind of do some succession planning for more than just one or two key positions. You might have to do it for quite a few positions. Or you hire externally and then you train them on that trade. So there's a couple schools of thought there. I think most like to promote from within when we can.
And one of the big oil and gas companies, even if they're hiring engineers or anybody like that, they make those new employees that are at all connected to the resource development side of their business spend a certain amount of time in the field as part of their orientation. So they're actually out there, either digging holes or working in the mud or whatever, whatever area they're going to be supporting. And so they've got so that as they're developing their part, these leaders, their future leaders, they've actually been on the ground doing that. And so, so maybe you do hire this, this person who's got this leadership ability and all of that, but you put them, you flip the coin and make them go back to doing the actual labor to get a feel for what that life is really like.
Yeah, I think that's important all the way around for variety of support positions. If you're supporting that industry, it's important to know what they go through, and especially for HR, what their day in, day out life is like. Be out on there in the floor and talk with them and know what they're going through to be able to support them and help run the business.
And at home, if you're listening and you're playing the Good Morning HR drinking game, we did just say that just because somebody's good at their main role doesn't mean they're going to automatically be a good supervisor or manager, that they've got the natural ability to do it if you don't train them. So, I mean, that's, check mark on that one on your bingo card, because that's, that comes up in just about every other episode. It's one of
Yeah.
the horses that I beat. So, yeah, so you're totally right there. What
Yeah,
other kind of
definitely.
labor challenges are you seeing as far as, dealing with, especially the younger generation? All we hear is how, the Gen Z, it used to be the millennials, then it was my generation, Gen X, they used to complain about us. But is there anything unique about the younger workforce that's moving into the manufacturing world?
Well, I think more and more, and it doesn't, I mean, a lot of it is younger, but some of it is just, when we went through COVID and people had remote work options and a lot more flexibility, and maybe they were an accounting for, a different type of company, and they could absolutely do their job remote, or they were a project manager, but they could do their job remote. There's not a lot in manufacturing and production and supply chain that can be done remote, to be honest. So even hiring support positions, sometimes you do need to be there in person at least some of the time. But it's very common for that expectation for those support positions that it's going to be remote. And sometimes it's hard to find folks that want to come into the office. And then there's kind of a couple schools of thought on that. Is that okay? Do we let our support positions work remote? Is it not fair because our folks in operations and on the floor, your foreman can't be remote, your line lead can't be remote. So is it fair that an IT person gets to be remote? Well, it depends. What kind of IT work are they doing? Are they supporting
Mhm.
those robots and those machines on the floor? They might not be able to. And sometimes it's hard to find some IT folks that want to come into the office. Some crave it and they want it. They're thrilled to have it. And others are like, God, I haven't been in the office in years. No, I'm not going in.
Right. Well, and I mean, in accounting and all kinds of positions that are remote, there are plenty of HR folks who are spending a good bit of their time working remote now. But,
Yeah.
and that's the question is, is this inflexibility about remote work, is it going to cost us in getting the best talent we have available for these, more office-based positions? And, is this, there's a disparity maybe between who can work remote and who can't, but is it is it really unfair, or is this just part of the job? And so,
Right.
how have y'all navigated those kind of conversations in your world?
I think each company really has to look at their values and what's important to them and how they operate. And because, like you said, you can lose out on some labor and some talent if you don't offer that. But look at, is it something that makes sense and aligns with our values and we can offer? And if not, what else can we offer? Is there something else if it's not remote? Because I think the benefit of remote is a little bit of flexibility. Not having to pay for gas to commute is probably a big one too. Is there something, a company can do to compensate for that if they don't want to offer remote to the positions that maybe they could, they just don't feel like that aligns with their values for those support position to work remote. So do you offer, I've seen all kinds of stuff. Some companies offer, extra leave where some of it's even like a little bit of a sabbatical where they'll pay for people to have time off after a few years, or where they've tried to work in some part-time schedules or things like that. And it's not easy when you're dealing with production and supply chain and things that have to go out, and you're monitoring where you're at every hour of the day to have people just be able to have flexible schedules and come and go, because it doesn't really work that way. The truck's there waiting in person to be loaded, and if nobody's there to load it, somebody's not getting something. So it's...
Yeah, or if you're on an assembly line, I mean, part A has to be put together with part B by a person on a certain schedule.
Yeah. So when these folks are out, they can't just make up their work later that night, when, after their doctor's appointment, or the next day when they come back from vacation. They can't just make it up. Somebody had to do it while they were out. And operations production either had to adjust a schedule or move some people around or pay some people some overtime. But if that is something that companies can look at to say, how can we offer a little bit of flexibility here? Do we offer some personal time or some leaves? Or can we have kind of this mid-flex shift? Or do we plan for pauses for production certain times of the day? Do we purposely plan for more people to be out? I've seen what's pretty common is some more loose, I guess you would say, attendance policies, kind of more broad, where people have a little bit of extra leeway on taking some days off, whether it's to go do some events with the family or just volunteering or helping a neighbor move or whatever it is. They have a little bit more flexibility on attendance, but that has to be planned for way ahead of time and staffed for way ahead of time.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. For 27 years, Imperative has helped risk-averse clients make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. Whether that means very thorough pre-employment background checks, due diligence for family offices or private equity firms, or any other kind of business due diligence, if there are people involved, there's risk involved. We help businesses mitigate that risk. You can learn more at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 140 and enter the keyword trades. That's TRADES. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Marci Sogan. So much of these jobs now, like we said, are so key to, the technology and, and it's like you say, it's like welding is the balance between that straight skill on, how to do it and the art of really making, making a clean seam. And there's certificate programs, and we're seeing a lot of, beginning to see the shift. And I've pushed, for a long time that 20-year-old college degree in a Bachelor of Science in Computer Technology doesn't tell you anything about that person's competence today with a modern piece of equipment. And I want to see what they can do, what their experience is, and what they can demonstrate, and certificates to show that people are up to date. And are you seeing that same kind of, are people going and getting their own certificates? Are those more accessible than they used to be? Because they used to be, even if you went to a trade school, you're still committing to 2 years of a trade school and a lot of student debt. What is that if I'm an 18-year-old kid who's looking to enter the workforce in a trade, or a 35-year-old who just can't sit behind a computer monitor another day, and I need to go do something with my hands and be, in a different environment. Where would I go to get those skills?
I see. So there are the traditional trade schools, but honestly, what I see is employers doing it. So I see it through the employers. They might have to start out entry level, but the employers will work with like Construction Education Foundation, and they will train and certify their own employees, and the employer's paying for it typically. So that's what I'm seeing, honestly, is a lot through the employers. And I do see it promoted a bit more in high schools now. Like they're just making sure that everybody knows this is out there and it's available. And I do feel like they are promoting these skills in high school a little bit more than they used to.
And to the extent that that they're promoting the career paths, what we've seen with some of the local school districts, just in my different environments, is that often they can promote the trade, but they don't internally even have the technology to match what the student would actually be working on if they left when they leave and they go into the workforce. They don't have, the school can't afford that, that $2 million machine that the person will be working on or whatever. Right. And don't, so they can't get a lot of that. And so it's going to have to be an employer providing that kind of support.
Yeah, a lot of times it is. And the employer will either bring a third party in to do it, or they will develop their own training program and their own certification and their own, that's what we do. And it works pretty well.
So in your environments, what are some examples of some of those kind of trades, that those skilled positions that y'all are developing in-house? And what is that? Is there a career path for those kind of jobs, or you get into that job and you're just stuck, or what is available? What does that look like?
Yes, there is a career path. And so some folks will start out like on an assembly line type thing, just kind of learning the environment, learning the industry, and expressing an interest. And I know we will, and I'm sure a lot of companies do this as well too. They ask, they suggest, they really promote the opportunities that are available because they need people. And then, so like welding or press brake operator, they can work their way up. And then it's not just, it's press brake operator 1 or press brake operator 2 and level 3, kind of like apprentice, kind of working your way up like that. It's kind of similar to that. And same thing, welding, and you might start with metal, or you might start on a robot. Some of the robots honestly are easier to work than doing it by hand yourself. That really is something that you have to practice at, and not everybody has that talent. And then they'll move to different, like aluminum. Aluminum's a little bit harder to weld and really does require a unique skill set that really has to be learned and just practiced over time. And so, we allow for those to develop and go through a career path and, move up. And then, of course, like I said, if anybody's interested in leadership, we'd love to hear that too.
Yeah. And the more skills that you've got people cross-trained on,
yes,
I'm sure your environment, just, you're dependent on what your, your sales team is able to bring in the door. And so at one point they may be, doing this kind of product, and then maybe in 6 months there'll be significantly different product depending on what a specific client's looking for. So having, as many, different, people who are cross-trained and can, be really responsive is probably really valuable.
Absolutely. And that's very common in all industries. And that's how an operation team and a production team can be a little bit more flexible. If they have a group of folks that are cross-trained in a variety of different machines and skills and processes, they're able to be more flexible.
And, I think there's, even in the traditional white collar or professional type, whatever you want to call that. I hate to say professional because, again, these folks who've developed these really, unique skill sets are as professional as somebody wearing, happens to wear a jacket and shirt to work every day.
Absolutely.
And so, but in the traditional admin, clerical, and that kind of that side of the business, there's probably, I know when I was coming up in HR, there was still that hesitancy. People didn't want to go do accounting at this manufacturing company, because that seemed like it had a connotation to it. It had, you're not at this, posh white collar firm. But there's a lot of roles, we talked about accounting and all those, but, design jobs, logistics planning, robotics engineers, all these other roles now that are part of a manufacturing environment that, they may sit behind a computer all day. And so are you finding those, for lack of a better term, white collar positions easier to fill than the trades when or do you think there's still a connotation to the manufacturing side of industry?
I think it's broad enough that those kind of support roles, that's what I call them, support roles, whether it's engineering or IT or whatever it is, they're probably not working on the floor. They couldn't, and we wouldn't want them welding anything ever. But they support that group and they support that business that does that process. I think the market has softened a little bit. I think it's the market. I don't think it's necessarily they don't want to work for that type of industry. I mean, I think it's exciting to go out on the floor and see what's happening and, what they'll let me, wherever I'm allowed. So I think it's fascinating. And I think most do. I think most are you're kind of proud of it. Honestly, you go out there and you go, we built that? Are you kidding me? It started out as this and ended up like that? Oh my gosh. It's impressive. Or you're driving through Fort Worth and maybe you're an accountant, but you work for one of those, construction firms or whatever. And you'd be like, hey, my company made that building right there. It's kind of, I think it's great. So I don't personally, I haven't seen that be much of a challenge.
Yeah, or in Fort Worth, and the F-35 flies over or something like that, and
right?
You're saying, okay, yeah, we that's I had something to do with that, So yeah. And speaking of somebody who's got an engineering son at Lockheed, so yeah, it's and he's the third generation of our family at Lockheed, so it's there's a long history there, and so yeah. Well, I appreciate all your time, but is any last thoughts about what HR professionals ought to be thinking about? Any tips for somebody, an HR professional in the manufacturing world?
I would say, sometimes you don't think of that industry as being the most tech savvy, but then you look at, like I said, all the robots and machinery and equipment and computer programs and systems and things that are being used. It's pretty high tech. So just really embracing that. And because HR tends to be more connected with the employees in person, I feel like our cultures tend to be a little bit more connected, because a lot of times if you're working out on a production floor or a construction site, or even out in the field, if you're going to customers' homes or whatever it is, you might not necessarily have a company email. And if you do, you're not sitting in front of a computer all day. So you may or may not see it. So HR tends to be more in person connected, I feel like. We're not we do send out emails, and we still have newsletters, and we still have our HRIS systems and the mobile apps and everything. But embrace that and take advantage of that in-person connection that we have with employees, because a lot of other industries and companies don't have that. And I feel like that's a strength that we have that we can leverage and, spend some time training some folks on how to use that new app. Spend some time talking with them, because other industries don't have that opportunity. And I feel like it's an opportunity that we have. So, take advantage of it and use it.
Yeah, I've always said HR should spend a lot more time working alongside the front line and understanding what's going on, whether it's manufacturing or you're a sales organization or you're retail or whatever you do. HR, to really HR well, needs to understand what's really going on with those frontline employees who are really touching the customer most directly.
Yep. Yeah, you have to. And most of us are based at those locations and can get out there and experience that and get to know them. And it's a nice opportunity, rather than sitting in, a corporate office somewhere, and, it's retail stores out across the US, and you don't work in any of them. So it's nice that we can kind of have that connected in-person connection with the employees.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks for joining me today, Marci.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.